The story I want to tell you, a true story, more's the pity, happened many years ago. Telling it is upsetting to me, for I fear it was I who set in motion the unfortunate events that took place all those years ago. We begin in the calm and comfort of the Cambridge College, where Parkins and I both had rooms. Parkins was a few years younger than me, and very young when he was appointed Professor of Mathematics. He was an extremely logical and rational person, as you might imagine, but with a sunny, quite innocent disposition. We got on very well, despite, or probably because of, the fact our interests and our outlooks were so different. My field of study was in the medieval world of history and literature, a distant world of which we can only know a fraction, full of uncertainties and of beliefs we cannot fully explain. Parkins saw that world as a mess of confusions and superstitions, a poor contrast to the scientific certainties he dealt in. But he was good-natured enough to humour me. After dinner, one evening just after the end of term, he mentioned he was planning to spend a week of the vacation on the east coast, near the ancient village of Burnstow. Not out of historical interest, of course. No, Parkins had recently taken up the pastime of golf, with his customary enthusiasm for new things. And Burnstow, with its sandy golf links so close to the sea, had become almost a place of pilgrimage for those devoted to improving their game. It so happened that I had been thinking of a stay in Burnstow myself, though not until the summer vacation. Not for the golf, I hastened to tell him. There's a site there where the Knights Templar had a preceptory, a type of small monastery, I explained, until they were persecuted and driven out under Edward II. Parkins nodded politely. And so little is known about their churches and their strange practices, I thought it would be useful to try and map out the plan of the building, their round temple, as they would have called it. I could tell from Parkins's expression he didn't see how such an occupation might be called useful, but his good nature was always to offer help to his friends. Why, he said, if you tell me whereabouts it might be, I'll do my best to give you an idea of the lie of the land when I get back. Well, the site, there won't be much showing above ground, must be close to the beach now. The sea has encroached badly along that bit of coast. From what I can tell, it must be about 3/4 of a mile from the Globe Inn, north end of the village. Where are you going to stay? Well, at the Globe Inn, as a matter of fact, said Parkins. It would be no trouble to go and explore, I interrupted, and thanked him, of course, but told him really not to trouble himself on my account, but to enjoy his week of exercise and the change of scenery. We turned to other subjects, and as I didn't realise that Parkins was actually setting off the next day, I had no chance of further conversation with him before he left. So, on the following day, Parkins successfully made his way from the college and arrived at Burnstow. He was made welcome at the Globe Inn and safely installed in a large room with 2 beds. He was pleased to be able to arrange his books and papers on a spacious table which occupied the window bay. The table was surrounded on 3 sides by windows facing the sea. A large central window looked straight out to sea, and those on the left and right gave long views along the shore to the north and to the south. Whatever the original distance between the Globe Inn and the sea, not more than 50 yards now separated them. The guests at the inn were, to a man, all dedicated to the pursuit of golf. The most conspicuous was a retired army officer, secretary of a London club, possessed of a powerful voice and of profoundly conservative views. Professor Parkins spent much of the next day in what he called improving his game in the company of this fierce gentleman, Colonel Wilson. And during the afternoon, perhaps some aspect of Parkin's game was to blame, the Colonel's demeanour assumed a colouring so florid that Parkins decided against walking back to the inn with him. I might walk back along the beach, Parkins reflected, yes, and take a look, there will be light enough for that, at the ruins which James was talking about. Don't exactly know where they are, but I expect I can hardly help stumbling on them. This he accomplished in the most literal sense, for in picking his way from the golf course to the shingle beach, he caught his foot in a gorse root, and over he went. When he got up, dusted himself down and surveyed his surroundings, he found himself in a patch of uneven ground, covered with small depressions and mounds. These, when he came to examine them, were actually masses of flints embedded in mortar, grown over with turf. He concluded, quite rightly, he was on the site of the preceptory he had promised to look at. And enough of the foundations seemed to be left to suggest the general plan of the building. He remembered my words about the Templars to whom this site had belonged, and how they were in the habit of building round churches. And he thought some of the mounds and humps did appear to form a circle. Few people can resist the temptation to try a little amateur research in a department quite outside their own. So Parkins carefully paced the circular area he'd noticed, wrote down its rough dimensions in his pocketbook. Then he examined an oblong lump which lay in the eastern part of the circle. It could, to his thinking, be the base of a platform or altar. At one end of it, a patch of turf was disturbed by a rabbit, perhaps, or some creature. He was tempted to probe the soil for evidence of masonry. So he took out his pocket knife and began scraping away the earth. And now followed another little discovery. A portion of soil fell inward as he scraped and revealed a small cavity. He lit one match after another to see inside, but the wind was too strong. However, by tapping and scratching away with his knife, he felt this must be a man-made hole in the masonry. Of course, it was empty. No. As he withdrew the knife, he heard a metallic clink. With his hand he was able to find and pull out an object from the floor of the hole. When he brought it into the light, now fast fading, he could see that it was also of man's making, a metal tube about 4 inches long, and evidently of some considerable age. It was now too late and too dark for him to think of any more exploring, but this had been so interesting that he decided to spend more time tomorrow on archaeology. The object which he now had safe in his pocket was bound to be of some significance. He felt sure. Bleak and solemn was the view on which he took a last look before starting homeward. A faint yellow sunset showed his route along the shore, a pale ribbon of wet sand intersected by black wooden groins. The wind was bitter from the north, but was at his back when he set off for the Globe. He quickly rattled and crunched through the shingle and reached the sand, where the going was quieter and much easier, except for the groins which had to be clambered over every minute or two. A quick look behind him, to measure the distance he had made since leaving the ruined church, showed him the possibility of company on his walk, in the shape of a rather indistinct personage who seemed to be making great efforts to catch up with him, but made little, if any, progress. I mean, there was an appearance of running about his movements, but the distance between him and Parkins did not seem materially to lessen. As he did not know the person, Parkins decided it would be absurd to wait. "And dear me, it's only a quarter of an hour to dinner time at the Globe. I must run." Dinner, sharing a table with the Colonel, was surprisingly calm, and an hour of playing bridge afterwards went very peaceably, for Parkins was a respectable player. When, therefore, towards midnight, he made for his room, he felt that life at the Globe for the coming week would be very satisfactory. Especially, he thought, if I go on improving my game. As he went along the corridor, he met the boot boy of the inn, who said, "Beg pardon, sir, but I was a-brushing your coat just now. There was something fell out of the pocket. I'll put it on your chest of drawers, sir, in your room, sir. A piece of pipe or something of the sort. Thank you, sir. Good night, sir. Parkins had almost forgotten his discovery. Now, with great curiosity, he turned it over in the light of his candles. It was made from bronze, he saw, and shaped very much like a dog whistle. In fact, it was, yes, certainly it was, some kind of whistle. He put it to his lips, but it was full of a fine caked-up sand or earth, which would need to be loosened with his penknife. Tidy as ever in his habits, Parkins cleared out the earth onto a piece of paper, which he took to the window to empty out. The night was clear and bright, and he saw, when he had opened the casement and paused to look at the sea, a figure silhouetted on the shore in front of the inn. He shut the window, a little surprised at the late hours people kept at Burnstow, and took his whistle to the light again. Why, there were some marks on it. And not merely marks, no, but letters. A little rubbing made the inscription quite legible, but the professor had to admit, after some puzzling, he could not tell what the meaning was. There were words on both the front and the back of the whistle. One read thus, Fur flabis flebis. The other, Quis est iste qui venit. Well, that one at least must be Latin, he thought. But it's a long time since I had to do any Latin. Possibly, he tried harder. It means something like, who is this who is coming? Well, he thought, rather pleased with himself, the best way to find out is to whistle for him. He blew tentatively and stopped, suddenly, startled, and yet pleased at the note he had produced. It had a quality of infinite distance in it, and soft as it was, he somehow felt it must be audible for miles around. It was a sound, too, that seemed to have the power of forming pictures in the mind. He saw quite clearly for a moment a vision of a wide, dark expanse at night, with a keen wind blowing, and in the midst a lonely figure, doing what he could not tell. Perhaps he would have seen more of the vision if it had not been broken by a sudden gust of wind rushing against his casement window. The sound of the whistle had so fascinated him that he could not help trying it once more, this time more boldly. The note was little, if at all, louder than before, and repetition broke the illusion. No picture followed, as he had half hoped. But what is this? Goodness, what force the wind can suddenly get up here? What a gust! There, oh, I knew the window fastening was no use. Oh, no, both candles out. This is enough to shake the room to pieces. The first thing was to get the window shut. Parkins struggled with it, almost as if he were pushing back a dangerous intruder, so strong was the pressure. It slackened all at once, and the window banged to, and latched itself. Now to relight the candles and see what damage had been done. No, nothing seemed amiss. No glass broken in the casement. Quickly though it had risen, the wind did not fall at once. On it went, moaning and rushing past the inn, at times rising to a cry so desolate it was painful to the ears. Whether it was the wind or something else that kept Parkins awake, he wasn't sure, but awake he remained, quite unable to stop his mind racing and to shake off all kind of worried imaginings. He found a little comfort in the fact that someone else seemed to be in the same boat. A near neighbour, in the darkness it was difficult to tell which direction, was tossing and turning in his bed too. Parkins shut his eyes tightly, determined to give sleep every chance. But now sleeplessness asserted itself in another form, pictures forming in the mind. The kind of pictures that make you open your eyes to make the pictures stop. Parkins' experience was a distressing one. He found that the picture which presented itself to him was continuous. When he opened his eyes, of course, it went, but when he shut them again, once more the picture framed itself afresh and acted itself out again. What he saw was this. A long stretch of shore, shingle, edged by sand and intersected at short intervals with black groins running down to the water. A scene, in fact, just like that of the walk this evening back to the inn. The light was obscure, late winter evening, slight cold rain, a gathering storm. On this bleak stage, at first no actor was visible. Then, in the distance, a bobbing black object appeared. A moment more, and it was a man, running, jumping, clambering over the groins, and every few seconds looking anxiously back. The nearer the poor man came, the more obvious it was. He was not just anxious, but horribly frightened. And he was almost at the end of his strength. On he came, each successive obstacle causing him more difficulty than the last. Will he get over this one? Thought Parkins. It seems a little higher than the others. Yes, half climbing, half throwing himself, the man did get over and fell in a heap on the other side. There, as if finally unable to get up again, he remained crouching under the groin, looking up in an attitude of total fear. So far, no reason for the runner's fear had been shown, but now, far up the shore, could be seen a little flicker of something light-coloured, moving to and fro with great swiftness and irregularity. Rapidly growing larger, it emerged as a figure, in pale, fluttering draperies, ill-defined. There was something about its motion which made Parkins fear to see it at close quarters. It would stop, raise its arms, bow itself toward the sand, then run, stooping across the beach to the water edge, and back again, and then, rising upright, resume its way forward at a speed both startling and terrifying. Soon the pursuer was hovering only a few yards from the groin where the man was hiding. Another 2 or 3 castings hither and thither. It came to a stop, stood upright, with arms raised high, then darted straight forward towards the man. It was at this point that Parkins would, every time, be unable to keep his eyes shut. With many misgivings as to failure of eyesight, overworked brain, excessive smoking, and so on, he decided to light his candle, get out a book, and pass the night awake, rather than be tormented by this persistent scene playing over and over. The scraping of his match on the matchbox and the light it made must have startled some creatures of the night, rats or whatnot, which he heard scurry across the floor with much rustling. Dear, oh dear, the match is out, dear. But the second one burnt better, and a candle and book were sorted out, and Parkins read till sleep eventually came upon him. After breakfast, he was in his room, putting the finishing touches to his golfing outfit, when one of the maids came in. "If you please," she said. "Would you like an extra blanket on your bed, sir?" "Thank you," said Parkins. "Yes, it seems to have turned rather colder." The maid was quickly back with the blanket. "Which bed shall I put it on, sir?" she asked. Why that one, the one I slept in last night," he said, pointing to it. "Beg pardon, sir, but you seem to have tried both of them. Leastways, we had to make both of them up this morning." "Really? How absurd," said Parkins. "I certainly never touched the other, except to lay some things on it. Did it actually seem to have been slept in?" "Oh, yes, sir," said the maid. "Why, all the things was scrumpled and throwed about all ways. If you'd excuse me, sir, quite as if someone hadn't passed but a very poor night, sir." "Oh, dear. Well, I must have disordered it more than I thought when I unpacked. Sorry to have given you extra trouble." "It's no trouble, sir, I'm sure," she said, and departed to giggle with her colleagues. Parkins set forth with fresh determination to improve his game. And he succeeded so well in this that the Colonel became quite chatty as the morning advanced. "Extraordinary wind blowing last night," he said. "In my part of the country, we'd say someone had been whistling for it." "Really?" said Parkins. "Is there a superstition of that kind?" "You'll find it said in many places near the coast. And my experience is there's generally something at the bottom of what these country folk hold to and have held to for generations. Parkins said with a slight hesitancy, I think I ought to tell you, Colonel, that my own views on such subjects are really very strong. I am in fact a convinced disbeliever in what is called the supernatural. What? Said the Colonel. You mean to tell me you don't believe in second sight or ghosts or anything of that kind? In nothing whatsoever of that kind, returned Parkins firmly. As for whistling for the wind, let me give you my theory. A man or woman of eccentric habits, perhaps, or a stranger, is seen on the beach at some unusual hour and is heard whistling. Soon afterwards, a violent wind arises. What more natural for the simple folk of a fishing village than to regard this eccentric person as having raised the wind? Now take last night's wind. As it happens, I myself was whistling. I blew a whistle, twice, and the wind seemed to come absolutely in answer to my call. If anyone had seen me whistling, were you? What sort of whistle did you use? It's a rather curious one. I found it yesterday. I have it in my... No, I must have left it in my room. When Parkins narrated the manner of his discovery of the whistle, the Colonel grunted and opined that if he were Parkins, he'd be careful about using such a thing that had belonged to a bunch of deviant papists. Their golfing continued well into the afternoon, until the light began to fail. Only then did Parkins remember he meant to do some more investigating at the preceptory. But it was no great importance. One day was as good as another. He would walk back with the Colonel. As they reached the corner of the inn, they almost collided with a boy rushing at high speed, and instead of running away, the boy clung on to the Colonel, catching his breath. The Colonel was about to reprove him, but very quickly realised the lad was almost speechless with fright. Enquiries were useless at first. When he did get his breath, the boy began to howl. "Oh, I've seen it wave at me out the window, and I don't like it." "What window?" said the irritated Colonel. "Come, pull yourself together." "The front window it was, of the hotel." The Colonel questioned him, and gradually succeeded in making out the story. The lad had been playing about on the grass in front of the Globe with some others. Then they went home to their teas, and he was just going when he looked up at the front window, and he seen it a-waving at him. It seemed to be a figure of some sort, in white as far as he knew. He couldn't see its face, but it waved at him, and it wasn't a right thing, not to say it wasn't a right person. "Which was the window? Was it the top one or the second one?" "The second one it was. The big window, what got two little ones at the sides." "Well, my boy," said the Colonel, after a few more questions, "you run away home now. I expect it was some person trying to give you a start. Another time, like a brave English boy, you must just throw a stone. Well, not that exactly, but you go and speak to Mr. Simpson, the landlord, and say that I advised you to do so." The boy's face expressed some doubt about that, but the Colonel continued, "And here's a sixpence, so you be off home, and don't think any more about it." The boy hurried off, and the Colonel went with Parkins to the front of the Globe and reconnoitred. There was only one window which matched the boy's description. "Well," said Parkins, "it's evidently my window the lad was talking about. Will you come up for a moment, Colonel? We should be able to tell if anyone's been taking liberties in my room." They were in the corridor when Parkins suddenly stopped in front of his door. "This is more serious than I thought," he said. "I remember now that I locked my door this morning. It's locked now, and what's more, here is the key." He unlocked the door and lit some candles. "Well," he said, "nothing seems disturbed." "Except your bed," said the Colonel. "That isn't my bed," said Parkins. I don't use that one, but it does look as if someone has been playing tricks with it." It certainly did. The bedclothes were bundled up and twisted together in a most tortuous confusion. Parkins was perplexed. "Perhaps I disordered the bedclothes last night when changing, and they haven't straightened it up since. Perhaps they came in to do so. and the boy saw them through the window, and then they were called away and locked the door after them. Yes, I think that must be it. Well, ring and ask, said the Colonel. The maid appeared and said she'd straightened that bed this morning when the gentleman was in the room, and hadn't been there since. No, she hadn't no other key. Mr. Simpson, he kept all the keys. He'd be able to tell the gentleman if anyone had been up. This was a puzzle. Nothing was missing, and Parkins was sure nothing else had been disturbed. Then Mr. Simpson confirmed he hadn't given the spare key to any person whatever the whole day. At dinner, the Colonel was unusually quiet and pensive. When he said good night to Parkins, he murmured gruffly, "You know where I am, if there's a problem during the night?" "Why, yes, thank you, Colonel Wilson, I think so, but there isn't much prospect of my disturbing you, I hope. By the way, did I show you that old whistle I spoke of? I think not. Well, here it is." The Colonel turned it over suspiciously in the light of the candle. "Can you make anything of the inscription?" asked Parkins, as he took it back. No, not in this light. Pagan stuff. What do you mean to do with it?" "When I get back to Cambridge, I'll give it to the archaeologists there. They may want to put it in one of the museums." Said the Colonel. "Well, you may be right. All I know is, if it were mine, I should chuck it straight into the sea. It's no use talking, I know, but I expect with you it's a case of live and learn. I hope so, I'm sure, and I wish you a good night." He turned away before Parkins could reply. Soon each was in his own room. For some reason, there were neither blinds nor curtains to the windows of the Professor's room. The previous night he thought little of this, but tonight there seemed every prospect of a bright moon shining directly on his bed, and probably waking him later on. How irritating. But with great ingenuity, he succeeded in rigging up, with the help of a rug, some safety pins, and a walking stick, a screen which might keep the moonlight off his bed. Shortly afterwards he was comfortably in that bed, and after a little light reading, he cast a drowsy glance around the room, blew out the candle, and fell back upon the pillow. He must have slept soundly for an hour or more, when a sudden clatter shook him in a most unwelcome manner. He quickly realised what had happened. His carefully constructed screen had given way, and a very bright, frosty moon was shining directly on his face. How annoying. Should he get up and reconstruct the screen, or could he manage to sleep if he didn't? For some minutes he lay there, undecided, and then there was something. With eyes wide open, he lay breathlessly, listening. There had been a movement, he was sure, in the empty bed on the opposite side of the room. Tomorrow he would have it moved, for there must be rats or something playing about in it. It was quiet now. No! A commotion began again, and there was a rustling and a stirring, and surely more than any rat could cause. I can try to imagine something of Parkins' bewilderment and horror, but I was not there. What he saw was a figure suddenly sit up in what he had known was an empty bed. He jumped out of his own bed instantly, made a dash towards the window, where lay his only weapon, the stick he'd used to prop up his screen. This was, as it turned out, the worst thing he could have done, because the thing in the empty bed, with a sudden, smooth motion, slipped from the bed and took up a position with outspread arms between the two beds and in front of the door. Parkins watched it in horror. Somehow the idea of getting past it and escaping through the door was intolerable to him. He could not bear the thought, he didn't know why, to touch it. And as for it touching him, he would sooner throw himself back through the window. It was till then in dark shadow, so Parkins had not seen what its face was like. Now it began to move in a stooping posture, and all at once he realised with some horror and some relief that it must be blind. for it seemed to feel about it with its muffled arms in a groping, random fashion. Turning half away from him, it became suddenly conscious of the bed Parkins had just left and swooped to feel the pillows in a way which made Parkins shudder, as he'd never in his life thought possible. In a few moments, it seemed to know the bed was empty, and then, moving into the moonlight, it showed what manner of thing it was. Parkins did tell me, shakily, something of what he remembered. A horrible, an intensely horrible face of crumpled linen. What exactly he saw, he could not or would not tell. But that the fear of it drove him to madness is certain. This thing, then, with formidable quickness, moved into the middle of the room, and as it groped and waved, one of its draperies swept across Parkins' face. He could not, though he knew how perilous a sound was, he could not keep back a cry of disgust. And this gave the searcher its clue. It swooped towards him in an instant. And the next moment Parkins was halfway through the window backwards, uttering cry upon cry at the top of his voice, and the linen face was thrust close into his own. At this, the last possible second, deliverance came. The Colonel broke the door open and was just in time to see the dreadful scene at the window. When he reached the figures, only one was left. Parkins had sunk to the floor in a faint, and in front of him lay a tumbled heap of bedclothes. Colonel Wilson asked no questions, but busied himself in keeping everyone else out of the room and getting Parkins back to his bed. And himself, he grabbed a rug and sat in the room on guard for the rest of the night. Early the next morning, the Colonel marched out of the hotel carrying a small object between his finger and thumb, which he threw as far into the sea as his brawny arm could send it. Later on, the smoke of burning linen rose from the yard at the back of the Globe. Exactly what explanation was patched up for the staff and visitors at the hotel, I confess I don't recollect. I was able to piece together the course of these events from discussions with Parkins when visiting him during his hoped-for convalescence. I also had some correspondence with Colonel Wilson, which filled in some of the details. And sadly, Parkins did not recover from the experience. The poor, dear man was broken in mind and spirit. He faded away before the year was out. A most distressing feature of his decline, inexplicable to his doctors, was a constant state of desperate weeping. If I had not spoken to him of my interest in the ruined Templar church, he would not have suffered this pitiful death. If he had not been so eager to please a friend, so curious to investigate things, so impulsive if. Of course, he was unaware of the troubled history of the Knights Templar in the Middle Ages, their extraordinary moral decay, and the charges of malignant practices that were finally laid against them. And he did not have the knowledge to comprehend the warning inscribed on the whistle. Yes, he was correct in translating one of the inscriptions. Who is this who is coming? Simple Latin, and a rather indirect kind of warning. But the second inscription, held a much starker warning. Fur flabis flabis. The Latin is obscure, and the meaning is cryptically wrapped up in the manner of an ancient curse. Parkins stood no chance of working it out alone. It means, thief, if you blow this, you will weep.